everyone, welcome to the African Exodus show. I'm your host Tierney Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's African news segment, I want to remind you all, if you want to stay connected outside of YouTube, which is very important when you have a world of censorship as we have, you have two ways to do so. The first way is the free way. You can add yourself to my Telegram channel. The link to that is down in the description. There I post different thoughts I have, anything I want to share with the community. That's just one extra way to stay connected. In addition, you could also add yourself to my Patreon group. There I also post a weekly exclusive just for you. But with that, let's get started with African and World News. Many of us are all aware of this. Africa is for sale. That's how outside nations view Africa. We've had a number of recent summits that have happened in the African continent where powerful countries go to Africa and they say to all the African leaders who are hungry for affirmation as well as financial incentives to continue their relationship with those countries, go to their summits and get to negotiate different deals, get certain money in their pocket, just because they show face and agree with the idea that this powerful nation should have a presence in the African continent. Now, we've seen it with the United States, we've seen it with Russia, we've seen it with China, and now another nation has thrown their hat into this whole summit race. And it's not France. We've also seen it with France. This time it's Saudi Arabia. So let's read through this article. First ever Africa-Saudi summit welcomes countries that are shunned by the West. The Gulf nation has high hopes for the Saudi Arab Africa Economic Conference, which it has heavily invested in. The summit guests included leaders without Western support, such as Gabon's transitional leader, General Brice Oligui Nguema, who deposed longtime President Omar Bongo in a coup in August. RFI's correspondent in Gabon, Yves Laurent Goma, said Nguema intended to speak about forest protection, but would also lobby for an end to global sanctions against his country. That's very interesting that the Gabon president, who is facing sanctions, not just sanctions outside of the African continent, but also from neighboring African countries who are not happy with the coup, is asking for forest protection or assistance protecting forests from Saudi Arabia. In his opening remarks, Saudi Finance Minister Mohammed Al-Jadaan said Saudi Arabia and the African continent continue to have a common history and destiny, adding that the partnership between the two sides was ever growing. I'm very curious to know what common history Saudi Arabia has had with the African continent outside of things like slave trades. But it says, meanwhile, Investment Minister Khalid Al-Falih said the kingdom's 600 billion euro wealth fund, the public investment fund, would make some game-changing investments in Africa. Preliminary energy agreements were signed with countries including Nigeria, Senegal, Chad, and Ethiopia, while Riyadh said it could help Ghana and other countries with their debt. As we know, Ghana has the most debt of any African country in the world. Mozambique said that it signed a financing agreement of $158 million with the Saudi Development Fund for infrastructure projects, including the construction of hospitals and a dam. Saudi Arabia has been forging diplomatic ties with the African continent since the 1970s. They were strengthened in 2018 with the appointment of a Secretary of State dedicated to African affairs. So you might have took note of the fact that Ethiopia was one of those countries. Now, I'm sure many of you all might have took note of the fact that Ethiopia was one of those countries said to be attending, which is very interesting because if you don't all remember, it's very recent that the Human Rights Watch had reported that Saudi Arabia was shooting at Ethiopian migrants. I mean, I think the report said hundreds have been reported to be killed while they were basically crossing over from their country to go and migrate into Saudi Arabia. So you have border agents that are just shooting people. No mercy for the people. No mercy whether or not it's children, women or children, just shooting. So the same country that has a history of anti-African sentiment being espoused throughout it is having an African summit. And this should not be shocking because obviously We know that France has had African summits. We know United States have had African summits. We know that different European powers have African summits, and all of them espouse anti-African sentiment or have histories of outright African oppression. So that's not surprising. I think what's more interesting about this is that Saudi Arabia is essentially throwing their hat in as an Arab country, and that African leaders, of course, are going for it. They're always going to go for it because they are a part of this world system. They're sold out to the world system. This world system is what pays them and puts money in their pocket. Even when those countries have done vile things against their own people, they have histories of forsaking their own people for personal wealth, personal elevation. And so this is not surprising for us. It's more of us, should be a reminder to us that our leaders are not controlled by us. Instead, they're controlled by the world system and the elites. And those who control are not of the interests of the people. And I think this next story will have more of a reminder of that fact to you. So let's go to the next story. So we're talking about African leaders that are about self-enrichment, that are not serving their people, serving their own pockets, serving their own lavish lifestyles. The story that we've heard over and over again in the African continent. This is how the world system has been able to operate, because there's a certain class of leaders. The same way that you have a boule in America, you have a boule in Africa. There's a certain class of leaders who are being controlled by the societies that have an interest in seeing to it that we never take control of our destinies. So these leaders, they get to sit in the presidency. And it's not a coincidence that when you look at their affiliations and you see certain signs that show that they have deeper affiliations than what they led on to. None of that is coincidence. And so the president of Nigeria, Tinubu, he's obviously not an exception to that. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has approved a supplementary budget earmarking millions of dollars for a presidential yacht and a sports utility vehicle for his wife and other top government officials. And this has again stoked anger among ordinary Nigerians over what they see as a growing economic disparity. Tinubu on Wednesday signed into law the budget that allocates $38 million for the presidential air fleet and other renovations. With the Senate's approval, lawmakers assigned some $6.1 million budgeted earlier for the yacht to student loans, and with the Senate's approval. The country's Navy said it had taken delivery of the yacht, but it has not been paid for. Presidential spokesperson Anjuri Ngalala defended the supplementary budget as serving to strengthen Nigeria's security architecture and address Nigeria's critical infrastructure deficit, among other considerations. It's just so funny that they can literally make anything up. I don't know how a yacht and SUVs, especially for your wife, has anything to do with strengthening security for Nigeria. So Nigeria is a country that has dealt with a lot of Islamic terrorism, which I always believe is being stoked by the West. So they're a country that deals with that a lot. And you're talking about a yacht and personal SUV vehicles that have nothing to do with the average Nigerian as being a way to help. Clearly that person is not serious. That's someone who is very understanding of the fact that those people who are hurting the most are not going to be in a position to do anything about it. Those people who actually would be willing to do something to oust him out of power, those people are probably too boggled down with their own struggles in order to even pay attention to what's going on with the president of Nigeria. And these people will throw out any excuse in order to keep things running because they're not serious about what's happening with their own population. So the article goes on to say that recently the country's 460-member National Assembly confirmed that all lawmakers will reportedly get a new SUV at the cost of more than $150,000 each. The lawmakers said the vehicles would help them to do their work better. I'm sure all of us would do our work better if we had $150,000 SUVs. So it's so interesting. It says that Nigeria is one of the world's poorest countries, and it's seeing food prices continue to soar to record highs. Also soaring is the frustration of ordinary Nigerians who see politicians' huge earning salaries where others, like medical professionals, often have to go on strike. If you remember, there's a big strike in Nigeria. It might have been a year ago where there was not even basic supplies for the people who are actually doctors taking care of people to be able to do their jobs. It goes on to say, it is by grace of God that I can eat. That's what one of the workers said. This is what one of the health workers said. Labor unions struggled to get the government to raise the minimum wage for civil servants from a monthly $67 a month. The 2019 pay increase came after workers staged an increase. So here we are. You have people who work for the government trying to get an increase from $670. Meanwhile, you have politicians who are able to drive $150,000 SUVs. When I read this story, it reminded me of a scripture I'm going to read real quick. This is from Ezekiel 34, 1 through 10. It says, the word of Yahuwah came to me saying, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, those shepherds, this is what Yahuwah says. Woe, shepherds of Yasharel, who have been feeding themselves. Should the shepherds not feed the flock? You eat the fat and clothe yourselves with wool. You slaughter the fat sheep without feeding the flock. Those who are sickly you have not strengthened. The diseased you have not healed. The broken you have not bound up. The scattered you have not brought back. Nor have you searched for the lost, but with force and with violence you have dominated them. They scattered for the lack of a shepherd, and they became food for every animal of the field and scattered. My flock strayed through all the mountains, and on every high hill my flock scattered all over the surface of the earth. There was no one to search for or seek them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of Yahuwah. As I live, declares Yahuwah, certainly because my flock has become plunder, and my flock has become food for all the animals of the field for lack of a shepherd. And my shepherds did not search for my flock, but rather the shepherds fed themselves and did not feed my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of Yahuwah. This is what Yahuwah says. Behold, I am against the shepherds. I will demand my sheep from them and make them stop tending sheep. So the shepherds will not feed themselves anymore, but I will save my sheep from their mouth so that they will not be food for them. So I say all that to say we understand that these people are doing what is in their own interest. What they're doing is not new, but what they're doing is absolutely reprehensible. We have to continue to shine a light on these people because corruption goes deep in our community. Corruption is what puts us in the condition that we are in. We ultimately know, though, that people like Tinubu have judgment pronounced against them and that he will. I don't care what type of protections he surrounds himself with. I don't care what security personnel he surrounds himself with. I don't care if he thinks he's coup-proof. He has the judgment pronounced against him for doing actions like this, feeding on the people of Nigeria who are suffering, feeding on the people while they can't even put clothes on, going to enrich yourself with something that to most people would never even get to touch in their lifetime. That's what he's so busy doing. While the people are starving, he's eating lavishly, he's clothing himself with lavish things. And this is what the shepherds have done in Yasharel for a long time. He's no different, and he has judgment pronounced over him for doing things like this. With that, let's go to the next story. You know, I find people like Van Jones just perplexing because how many nigga wake-up calls do you have to get before you realize that you are what you are? And yet he has been willing to play Uncle Tom that role. He's been willing to play that role to the Oscars, basically. He's fine with it. He's fine with being a puppet. He's fine with dancing for master. He's fine with it. And no matter how many times it has caused him to look stupid, he goes on with it and he continues because this is something that fills him out inside, you know. And I only say that because he seems like he genuinely loves the position. He loves to be taken care of. He loves to be celebrated by his masters and overlords. He loves to cry for them. He loves to do these things and it fills him with joy. So we've seen that just a couple days ago if you didn't know, there was a pro-Israel rally in Washington, D.C., and a number of people showed up. Not many of our people, but Van Jones did show up for the Israeli cause. So it says, pro-Israel rally chants no ceasefire over call for no more bombs in Gaza. And this is going to show just how oblivious Van Jones is to the crowd that he represents. CNN analyst Van Jones was jeered at a pro-Israel rally on Tuesday when he called for no more bombs to fall on Gaza, prompting rally attendees to loudly chant no ceasefire in response. Let me just recall this for you or break it down better. Van Jones is at a pro-Israel rally. I think he was the sole black voice, although there was one woman who could have been racially ambiguously black. But he was basically the one brother in the room, right? And he goes to do a pro-Israel rally, standing up for Israel, standing against anti-you-know-what. And while he's there, he tries to play the middle, like he always does. He doesn't want to seem too to the left. He doesn't want to seem too to the right. So he says, after lauding Israel and standing with Israel, he says that, you know what, we don't want any more bombs to drop in Gaza. And to that, something that I feel you would feel like most people agree with. You know, you're sick of seeing people blow up or people die, especially children. Something that seems very relatively non-controversial, he gets shouted down at by the pro-Israeli crowd who starts yelling at him, no ceasefire, no ceasefire. So it goes on to say, organized as an effort to stand against anti-you-know-what and show solidarity with Israel, the March for Israel attracted tens of thousands of demonstrators to the nation's capital, as well as a bipartisan slate of prominent speakers. It was also seen as a counter to the massive pro-Palestinian protests that have taken place across the globe. Early on in his speech, which featured him calling for Hamas to end its reign of terror, Jones was warmly received by the crowd. When he was sticking to the script, he was warmly received by the crowd. But the mood changed quickly when he seemingly urged for the Israel-Hamas war to come to an end. I'm a peace guy. I pray for peace, the liberal pundit declared. No more rockets from Gaza and no more bombs falling on the people of Gaza. The audience began booing Jones before shouting no ceasefire, prompting the former Obama advisor to get a bit flustered as the chants grew louder. While demanding an end to anti-ish people and other forms of hate, Jones seemed to accidentally call for an increase in Islamophobia, nervously saying, let's take a stand against Muslims. Some people were saying that was a Freudian slip of the tongue, which who knows, it could have been. The funny thing, though, is that your presence there to begin with, the question is why? Why were you in a place where you, as someone who tries to act like you're against racism, tries to act like you're against things like Israel's doing right there, why were you there in the first place among people who were not calling for peace? That wasn't a peace rally. That was a pro-Israel rally. I can see you making an argument that you did not want to go to a pro-Palestinian rally or pro-Hamas rally, maybe because you said, oh, I'm just for peace. That wasn't a peace rally. That was, if anything, a genocide rally, if you understand what's happening right now with Israel. So Van Jones is facing something that he has repeatedly walked himself into. That is, he's facing trying to be a good old boy while standing right next to genocidal maniacs, murderous regimes, murderous people who have no affinity for his cause, the cause that he says that he's all about. And people like him will get rewarded. I'm sure he'll continue to get rewarded. I'm sure he'll continue to be inside of the positions that he's gotten to just by trying to play both sides of the fence. Unfortunately, though, he can do that for so long with certain people, but most people the people who he would probably try most to appeal to, being his people, those people I think have had enough of him. So no surprises there. Let's go to the next story. In Ghana, they just had a reparations conference. Now, let me just say to begin with, I think Nana Akufo-Addo, president of Ghana, is very guilty of taking advantage of the lost feelings that many of us have as a result of what has happened to our people. When I mean the lost feelings, the need to reconnect, the need to try to reach for justice. And doing things like this, doing things like a year of return that doesn't actually mean anything, meaning like how many of the people who came were given any hope of a meaningful return, doing things like that are more so ways, if you think about it, to increase things like tourism inside of Ghana, or increase the prominence of Ghana inside of the African diaspora at a time where it is a country that has indebted itself more than any other African country. So when we hear about a reparations conference, as soon as I heard it was happening, I looked sideways because I understood a number of things. Number one, Kufuor is not the person to ask for reparations for anyone, because he is a part of the machine that continues to deplete Africans of what they already have. He's a part of that machine. If you're a part of the machine and you're not even stopping what you see happening in real time to your own people, then what makes you think this person is going to be a prominent voice in order to do so for other people or for the diaspora? Clearly, he's not that person. He's also very controlled. I think most of us should understand that by now. He can talk a good game, but he's very controlled. He's very measured in how much he'll push the powers that be. He's very measured. You know, you might hear him say certain things, but you certainly won't hear him demand that justice. You might hear him ask for things, but you won't hear him say, you, Emmanuel Macron, you, Biden, you people not just should do something, you must do something. And if you don't do something, you're going to face consequences. You won't hear him say things like that. So he knows how to not cross a certain line with the imperialist powers. And because of that, he's still inside of the position he is in, as being one of the African leaders who are very controlled by the West and very beholden to Western interests. So that in itself, I was already suspectful of him wanting to host a reparations conference. But let's see what came out of this. So Africa seeks action plan on slavery reparations at a Ghana conference. Financial reparations are long overdue to Africans in the diaspora as compensation for enslavement of people of African descent, Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo said on Tuesday, on the first day of a conference on how to address such historical injustices. Let's pause right there. I have a real problem with anyone who wants to offer ways to address problems or create action plans to address problems that they themselves have never done, meaning there's never been a person to date who has effectively brought reparations for people of African descent, meaningful not payoffs, reparations. You know, there's a real meaning to that term. Repairing is a necessary part of it. But successfully brought reparations for people of African descent. No one has done that. And there's a reason why no one has done that, because there's absolutely no willingness from the imperialist machine. There's no willingness from the countries that are oppressing us to do so. And the reason is because they know very well, number one, the day they give reparations, and we'll talk about that day, the day that they give reparations will be their undoing. The day that they give reparations will be their power being ripped from them. And they're not going to do anything to exacerbate that happening. So let's go on. It says, advocates have long called for paying reparations or making other amends for slavery, but the movement has recently gained momentum worldwide amid growing from African and the Caribbean countries. No amount of money can restore the damage caused by the transatlantic slave trade, but surely this is a matter that the world must confront and can no longer ignore, Akufo-Addo said, launching a 4-day reparations conference in the Ghanaian capital of Accra. The event is expected to produce an African-led action plan to pursue reparatory justice, establish an African committee of experts to oversee the plan's implementation, and boast collaboration with the broader diaspora, according to a list of planned outcomes on the West. The entire period of slavery meant that our progress economically, culturally, and psychologically was stifled. There are legions of stories of families who were torn apart, Akufo-Addo said. You cannot quantify the effects of such tragedies, but they need to be recognized. Trust me, I think him and probably many of the people at that conference know already. There's recognition, first of all, is nothing for us. For the most part, Western countries have already recognized they've done something ill to African people. That's just a pretty general consensus. It's a popular consensus. It's one that you would probably be outcasted for not saying something of that nature. So that's not a significant thing. Trying to make a reparations plan where you're not in a power to bring it about is wasting time. That's my message to my people, because what I see right now is that there's a lot of people who have taken advantage of some of our innocent belief that the countries where we are residing have a real interest in undoing what they have done to begin with. Some of us believe that innocently. Some of us believe that because we believe what they say. They say that we're America, the world, the country of liberty, the country of justice, and you might take them at their word for it. If they were the country of liberty and justice, they would not have enslaved you to begin with when they made promises to give you a mere 40 acres and a mule that would have been delivered to you. They would not have created a system of Jim Crow around you. They would not have created a system, an international system of neocolonialism if they were all those things. So we have to believe them for what they are. They are our enemies. That's what they are. And if you understand that you're asking for something from your enemy, then maybe you stop making strategies and plans to do that and start looking at other ways to be able to fend for yourself, because you're in enemy territory. You're fighting for your life. You're not working with a friend. You're not working with someone who has affinity for you. Instead, you're literally working against your enemy. So with that, I do want to read a scripture to remind everyone, there is a day of reparations coming, and that day, it's not going to be an action plan that brings it about. It's not going to be people who are of the bourgeoisie who come up with these elaborate write-ups at conferences. It's not going to be any of that. We're told what it's going to be. Isaiah 65:6. It says, "Then you will see and be radiant, and your heart will thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you. The wealth of the nations will come to you. A multitude of camels will cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba will come. They will bring gold and frankincense and proclaim good news of the praises of Yahuwah." Meaning, we're told of a day where those countries who will be judged for what they have done around the world to us, those countries will be the same ones that will have to bring what they have done, who will bring the spoils, bring the plunder. And it will not be a matter of a neo-colonial machine bringing it about. It's going to be a free and just movement from the Most High. So I say all that to say, I believe you should take your eyes off of things like reparations. Some people won't like that. I understand, because it's a hot topic. It's not that they're not due to us. Yes, they're due to us. But if you're not in the power to bring something about, why are you trying to ask for it? Just reparations are an issue of power. They're not an issue of trying to appeal to someone's morals. The only time that they've given reparations in the past is when it was in their own interest to, and it will never be in their interest to give us reparations because of how much is owed and how much has continued to happen since the initial crime of abducting us or bringing us to places to work for them for free. So if we have that understanding, then we can take our eyes and our mind and our hearts off of this world for solutions, and instead put our eyes and our heart and our minds focused on the Most High and the truth that He is going to be the one to deliver us, not Ghana's president or presidents of any countries for that matter. So let's go to the next story. Okay, so we're at our last story. I wanted to talk about this because I think we have to understand part of the problem when you have a problem explode like what happened with October 7th between Israel and Palestine. A part of the problem is that the West has no intention of dealing with any of the consequences for anything they've ever done. That's what we've seen come out of the discourse. People who want to talk about being victims, but don't want to talk about anything that they have done that might have caused or had something to do with the conditions that caused for these things to be done. This is just something that people who are of power don't want to ever deal with. It's a reality they don't want to deal with. It's a truth they don't want to deal with. They want to think that they get to live in peace off of the plunders and the spoils of the oppressed. This is literally what colonialism is about. This is literally what imperialism is about. This idea that we can build a system around ourselves to where we can take and not have to give back. We can control and not have to recognize sovereignty. That's what it's all about. Now, one of the things that I've always been fascinated with is tourism. Tourism industries, particularly where people are suffering. one of the countries that we know in Africa that has always been a hot tourism spot for the West is the country of South Africa. And a part of the reason of that we know is obviously because South Africa was occupied and still is occupied by a white colonial force. They've been able to beautify, westernize, whatever you want to call it. They've been able to develop many parts of South Africa for the people who are of power, of wealth, people who are coming from overseas. They can have a good time there. Not the people who are indigenously from the country, not the people who are rightfully South Africans, rightfully of Azania. Not those people. Those people instead have been walled up into ghettos, despite the fact they're like 80% of the population. The Africans in South Africa have been completely isolated from their own society, completely pushed off of the land and put into these small, concentrated areas of poverty. This is the reality that most of our people live inside of South Africa. Now, despite that fact, we still have people who think that I'm going to go to this country and enjoy it, and I'm not going to see any of the consequences of anything that has been done in the past or of the system that I benefit from. So draw that parallel back to what happened with Israel and Palestine. So many people who feel like we have no part in what has happened around us, despite the fact that we benefit from it. We have no guilt about what's happening just right over there. Instead, we'll enjoy our free-loving lives and enjoy our wealth, enjoy our beautiful, quiet homes. Meanwhile, the suffering happening right next door, we're not bothered, right? And the fact that you should be bothered when you want to remind those people who are of power that you should be bothered, and that don't think that you are so safe from the actions of your forefathers, your fathers. You don't think that you're so safe from those actions because things have been shut away or walled off away from you where you can't see it. Let's go back to South Africa though. So I thought this story was very interesting because Google has essentially decided to start avoiding dangerous routes in South Africa. So Google navigation maps, Waze, and Google Maps will no longer guide users through Cape Town's and Nyanga Township and nearby areas due to increased security concerns, announced Alistair Mokina, the company's South Africa head, on Monday. Last week, a U.S. tourist was robbed and shot in the face at Nyanga after following the navigation route, which directed him through the township as the quickest path from Cape Town International Airport to the city. In September, British surgeon Carl Teo, who was 40 years old, was shot during a protest by taxi operators at the same township. He was fatally shot. Local media reports that additional individuals, mostly tourists, have been attacked or killed while driving through Nyanga, and often after heeding the advice of the navigation apps. Following Mr. Taylor's tragic incident, the UK government issued a warning to its citizens visiting South Africa, urging caution when relying on GPS navigation and advising against taking alternative routes away from the main roads, as these routes can lead to less secure areas. The advisory highlighted the most violent crimes occur in townships on the outskirts of major cities and in isolated areas. So obviously I'm not, saying it's good that these people are getting harmed or killed. That's not the message. The message is that Google has effectively tried to deal with the issue that the colonized state, the still apartheid state of South Africa has been suffering from. Their way of trying to deal with the fact that most of the people in South Africa are poor, most of them are landless, most of them are in these concentrated ghettos, most of them are living in dangerous conditions themselves. Their way of trying to do that for tourists that come from the West is to say, we're going to make special routes just for you, where we're going to direct you through safe neighborhoods. Yes, the people there are not safe. Yes, the people that are children there are not living these safe lifestyles, but we're going to make a special path just for you to get you to where you want to go, where you don't have to deal with the consequences of your privilege and of your stature inside of the road system. Now, that doesn't give you a wrong feeling. Like, how is it that you could so easily find ways to try to avoid the problems that this world created, that this society created, that South Africa created, only for the people who come from the outside, only for the people who are of privilege, yet you have no constructive ideas system that surrounds us for the people who are actually living these conditions on a day-to-day basis. So this is a reminder to us, the way that imperialism tries to survive is by plugging up holes where they can, finding momentary solutions that they know are not going to last forever, but hopefully will last just long enough so that at least, individuals, maybe they'll get to not have to deal with the issues. Maybe they'll pass it on to their children or grandchildren. That's the way that it operates. It's arrogance, really, to think that one life is more important or worth protection than many lives. It's arrogance. It's just arrogance. And we see a lot of arrogance in wake of what's going on with Israel and Palestine. And you don't have to necessarily side with any side to see that the idea that 1,400 people who were killed, their deaths outweigh the deaths of over 10,000 people. That math just doesn't add up. Yeah, this is what they're teaching or telling the world and trying to get us to accept. And it's up to you to accept it. If you buy mainstream narratives, if you say what the news tells you, if you parrot what they tell you, then you're going to be the one buying into their own narrative that goes against common sense, rationality, and morals. So that's all I have for this week, everyone. I thank you all for joining, and y'all willing, I will be back next
How
week.
you design those programs. In all of the programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman. Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were. Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing. And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community. So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned, indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics.
Genocide with the NAACP, the Urban League, and the traditional We Shall Overcome civil rights leaders of the 50s and 60s that have been all but abandoned and ignored by younger people, Sister Souljah included.
I think that the dice are loaded, and that's what's left out of Mr. Brown's piece. See, there was a period of time in this country after Reconstruction where African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klans, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America, or in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient. And you can say no, but you haven't lived this life. You haven't lived this life.
Listen, to be happy. I'm talking about that. All right. Now, to paraphrase Senator Bradley of New Jersey, the state from which your piece was.
Senator Bradley gets much right when he talks.
He does, and he, among other things, and he's not claiming to be particularly original with the observation, we can't get there unless we go together. I have a terrible feeling that behind me are some people who do not agree.
Senator Bradley of the all-white United States Senate said we can't get there unless we all go there together. Sorry, none of us are where he is. That's number one. Number two, you're making a moral appeal to a country that doesn't have a moral conscience. The question becomes that when white people feel serious and angry and upset about abortion, they come out in the thousands up to the millions to say, this is what we believe about abortion. Where is the white outcry against white racism that murders African people all around this entire globe? It doesn't exist. So who are these white good people? I want to meet them. I want to see them. It was not enough.
But that might be all we can get.
No. And guess what? I don't work with all I can get. What I work with is what I have. Listen, you have to have some confidence in the power of African people amongst ourselves to establish a foundation.
We have.
We have. We have utter chaos in our cities, and you got to
no black
that.
institutions we
You
can build?
can have a program. I'm not saying we've built a lot of institutions, and those institutions have not been effective. The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically, and you may have a program, Mr. Brown may have a program, but what we got to talk about is an American government that tracks millions of African people who don't go to your program, don't go to Brown's program, millions of African people, not only here, but all around the world. And if we are not honest enough to say who are our friends, who are our enemies, to know what a friend is, to know what an enemy is, we will constantly be trying to get into people's parties, to shake our butts with them, to get them to like us, and that's not the question. The question is, what can we build amongst ourselves to secure ourselves from our enemies so that we will be able to survive into the future?
Mayor Kelly.
Mayor, enough to know that if I walk out Washington, D.C. tonight, some black kid in Washington, D.C. is blowing up another black kid's head for a pair of sneakers because the institutions that we're talking about, not the things that we hold up to say, look, this is one example. The institutions that we're talking about are not saving the minds of those African children. That is the honest truth. None of these Negroes saved me. None of these Negroes. None of them. Listen, you know who saved me? A man named John DeSane in Inglewood, New Jersey, who told me who I was, who showed me my history, who told me who my enemies were, who let me know that this was not an easy world, who let me know that this was a cold environment, who let me know what he's not a part of is dilly-dallying with the minds of African children and letting them know what the real situation is in America.